Hi everyone, and welcome to Washington Echoes, where we travel back through time. I'm Audrey Fletcher, and I'm sure that the Quaker watermill and the Washington Brook in Washington Village will come as a great surprise to many people in the area. Our story begins in 1613, when Washington Village saw the beginning of a new era of regeneration, for it was in that year that the old hall was sold to William James, Bishop of Durham, who in turn settled it on his youngest son, Francis. The building was turned into a gentleman's residence, complete with a new central wing to accommodate a cellar and a new staircase. In addition to the modernisation of the manor house, 5 cottages were built, no doubt replacing earlier run-down buildings, and they had their backs facing onto the Washington Brook. And it was at the south end of these new cottages that a corn grinding mill with an undershot water wheel was built, presumably a new replacement. It was Christopher Bennett, local artist and historian, who recorded that the mill was known locally as the Quaker Mill in his booklet Local History. In the sketch, the red arrow indicates where the undershot water wheel was positioned. An undershot water wheel is a vertically mounted water wheel that is rotated by water striking paddles or blades at the bottom of the wheel. It is an ancient design and is not usually the most efficient of water wheels. However, in Washington Village, it had the advantage of a swiftly flowing brook to turn the wheel. The diagram shows the mechanics of the undershot water wheel, that is, the mill race creating the water flow to turn the mill wheel, which powers the gearing and the millstones to grind the corn. And here we have illustrations to show the workings of a corn grinding water mill, both outside and inside. The undershot water wheel relies on huge quantities of water moving at considerable speed to drive the mill. Such mills are usually built on substantial rivers. Streams, it seems, just don't have enough water. By 1622, the newly renovated Old Hall, cottages and Quaker watermill would have been completed. How beautiful the estate would have looked on the banks of the Washington Brook, and what an asset to Washington Village. An idyllic setting indeed. And here, still standing 400 years later, are the Old Hall and 3 of the cottages, thanks to the effort of local historian Fred Hill, who believed that they were worth saving from demolition. I wonder, can you spot the differences that 400 years has made? Oh goodness, what a transformation! Notably, the watermill has gone, and the river has disappeared underground into a culvert, with a new road built over the top. The remodelling of Washington Village took place after the old Anglo-Saxon church on the hill was pulled down in 1832. Well, actually parts of it had to be blown up. The original road ran on the far side of what were the council offices, but what is now part of Liberty Green, and the entrances to the church and Old Hall were from the Washington Arms side. The idyllic nature of Washington Village was shattered when the opening of the Washington F Pit in 1777 at what is now Albany had the disastrous effect of almost drying up the Washington Brook as it headed down into the village. It tapped into the Mount watercourse, not only to create a pond, but also to power a water mill, which provided the energy to haul the coal to the top of the 600-foot shaft. The top photo shows the source of the Mount Spring at Spring Well, which fed the Washington Brook watercourse, running southeast. The dip in the field is clearly visible even today. The bottom two photos show different stages in the life of the F-pit. The Mount watercourse was fed from the freshwater spring at the Mount, which was on the corner of Mount Lane and the Roman road, the Fell Dyke, which ran from Chesley Street through Springwell and on to the Roman fort at Reckington. Following the lie of the land, the Mount watercourse travelled in a southeasterly direction through the Blue House Fields, emerging at the north end of Musgrave Terrace on what is now Spout Lane, as the Washington Brook. It continued its course down through the village and, turning left at the home bank, provided water for the Quaker mill. In addition to the disastrous effect of the F-pit tapping into this watercourse and almost drying up the Washington Brook, the wells dried up too. According to the parish records, a relatively deep draw well was sunk in the centre of Washington Village in 1775, but was locked up as useless in 1777. Another draw well was sunk near the spout later in 1777, but this was also rendered useless. As a result, people had to carry their drinking water from either the Marble Arch or Well Bank for almost 100 years. Quite a trek. And now, returning to the Quaker mill and the Old Hall cottages, the picture shows how they would have looked in 1717. Only the two-end cottages at the far left were pulled down in 1900. I can't help but think how beautiful they would have looked today had they been saved and renovated, as were the others in the 1950s. However, prior to the demolition of the two-end cottages, the old corn mill water wheel was dismantled and placed to one side, away from the Quaker mill house. This was the result of the Washington Brook having been placed into a culvert when Washington Village was remodelled from 1832 onwards. Hence the Quaker mill became redundant. 6 years later, in 1906, 2 new houses were built on the site of the demolished cottages using stones from the original 300-year-old buildings. The side and fronts of the 2 new houses can be seen in the photos below. So, what happened to the millstones from the demolished Quaker corn mill? Well, for many years the 2 mill grinding stones found a home where the Quaker corn mill once stood, in the garden behind Orchard House. Years later, it would seem that one of these found a resting place outside the village smithy, while the other is possibly situated next to the steps at the Old Hall. The Washington Brook now runs through a culvert under the road, which was newly created following the demolition of the Anglo-Saxon church on the hill in 1832. Oh, this was the same year as the smallpox was prevalent in Washington Village. Then, on top of that, in 1833, there was an outbreak of cholera. When you look carefully at the far right of the photo, you will notice that the road is 4 to 5 feet higher than the front of the cottages. This is a visible result of the Washington Brook running through a culvert under the road. Today, the Washington Brook can be seen just inside the entrance to the nuttery at the Old Hall. A mere remnant of its former self, there is a small footbridge across it. In addition to the Quaker water mill at Washington Village, there was yet another mill, the Biddick Windmill, which was recorded on a local map in 1702, as seen at the far left of the screen. However, it is not until the late 1800s map to the right is examined that the site of the Biddick windmill can be accurately determined. It was situated at the junction of Glebe Crescent, Emerson Terrace and Mill Lane, now Station Road. That is, it was situated on the site of the Glebe School, now renamed the John F. Kennedy Primary School. This dispels the notion that there was a watercourse down Station Road to the chemical works. The Quaker watermill at the Old Hall Cottages and the Washington Brook would have come as a great surprise to many people of the area. The village has undergone such a lot of changes over the years. In fact, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, the area was waterlogged due to the rising of the sea levels after the meltdown of the last ice age. The Anglo-Saxon Weshen is a descriptive place name and translates as a washing place, meaning a body of water, or marshy place. Weshen translates into Geordie as Weshen, as in Washington. A later derivation of Weshen by the Anglo-Saxons was Wessing, meaning soaking, and it is from this that Wessington sprang. Indeed, much of eastern Durham was marshland. The Wessington Swamp, for example, between Washington and the Three Horseshoes, was only drained as late as 1820. To the right of the screen we see an illustration of how Weshen may have looked in Anglo-Saxon times. Well everyone, I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation and subscribed to my channel. I look forward to sharing my continued research into Washington history with you in my next video. Bye for now.